Hello, folks. My name is George McGowan. I'm Project Director at the Old Library Trust Healthy Living Centre in Craigan. And today I will be hosting, as part of FEDA, the Ayrshire Wall FEDA 2020, a virtual meeting and in conversation with Professor Siobhán O'Neill. And this is part of this year's planned programme of activities. And I'm really looking forward to asking Siobhán quite a number of questions and getting some feedback from her. So, Siobhán, you're very welcome, and it's great that you could join us as part of FEDA 2020, and we really appreciate it. Professor Siobhán O'Neill, and you are Professor of Mental Health Sciences at Ulster University, and you're also the new mental health champion in Northern Ireland. So before we go on to that, Siobhán, I just think it'd be important if we talk about who Siobhán is. So who's Siobhán rather than Professor Siobhán O'Neill? So if you could just let people know a wee bit about yourself, that would be really helpful. I think people appreciate it.
I'm delighted to be here. It's great to be able to do something locally because I'm from here. I'm from the Derry area. I live outside Derry even, so it's just lovely that you've invited me to participate in this, and please call me Siobhán. The professor thing still is a bit embarrassing. I know there's a whole thing about, oh, you should use proper titles, but I still kind of have difficulty seeing myself as anything other than a 15-year-old, I suppose. So Siobhán is the name. I'm Siobhán O'Neill. I live outside Derry. I was born and reared here. I live on my dad's farm where I was raised. I went away for a period of time and came back, and now I'm back in Craigban, so it's outside Park, if any of you know it. We've got a great Gaelic team out here, and it's great living out in the country. So I'm a lone parent, and that was my choice. I've got a wee daughter called Annabelle, and she's 3. So I'm navigating all of that as well, and we're starting nursery school now in September in a pandemic, which is going to be a great crack altogether. So I've got a lot of the same difficulties, I think, as many parents. And in the pandemic, I was trying to work from home and look after her and all as well. I went to university in Queen's in Belfast, studied psychology, then went to Galway and did a master's there. And for me, that was plenty of education enough. But I ended up working in the public health department there, and then got a job in Jordanstown. So I went back up and did a part-time PhD. So I was always our background was always about working, and I didn't really expect ever that I would have a doctorate, and got it part-time, and worked at the same time. So I was always used to juggling a lot of things in life. And then after that, I worked in Belfast, as I said, in Jordanstown then, and did my PhD part-time with the university, and I've kind of been there ever since. So a few weeks ago, when Robin Swans, one of his staff at the Department of Health, rang me up and said, would you be interested in this mental health champion role? I couldn't refuse. It was just perfect, because I've been really interested. I've been doing a lot of work in suicide and mental health in Northern Ireland, and working with a lot of groups, and realising that there's no point in doing research unless you're actually applying it and doing some good with it, and learning and applying it in practice. So I've been trying to do that anyway, and having, to be honest, finding it difficult juggling everything, and then to be asked if I could do this on a more formal basis, this role was just such a privilege. So here I am. I started on Monday. So what day is today? Wednesday. This is my 3rd day as interim mental health champion.
Is that what it is? Enough, yeah. So I'm going to come on that in a wee second. But I see somewhere too that you've done a bit of abseiling and a bit of running and things like that. Is that right?
I abseiled down the Tower Museum, George, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I will never do anything like that again. I'm not cut out for it. I was just petrified, shook. It was a good reminder of what fear really feels like. It's been a long time since I was that scared of anything. But I do run. Yeah, that's one of the ways that I look after my own mental health. And when I say run, I mean we're talking like it would rarely go beyond 10K, to be honest. And like 5K 3 times a week would be happy there. I do a bit of yoga as well to keep myself right. I like to try and, find ways of relaxing, of distancing myself, of looking at my own thoughts and reflecting and all of that. And yoga helps with that, and running helps with that. So that's how I wind down. But I don't have a lot of free time. I honestly don't get out that much because Annabelle's full on, and my mum babysits for me when I need it, and I have a childminder there too, and my days start very early, and I end up going to bed quite early too. But life's good, and I'm really privileged to have this new role now and to be talking to people like yourselves. It's
You
just
keep busy then, you keep busy. Just in terms of your new role, obviously it's something that kind of, well, I suppose from my point of view, mental health and I suppose in its community right across Northern Ireland is a major issue, major concern. Obviously we've been impacted by COVID, and that's through a complete spanner in the works, and there's obviously the impact of that on mental health as well. And I'll probably talk to you a wee bit more about that too. But just in terms of the progress to date and the role as, mental health champion, how is that progressing, and how are you finding it? And I'll come on then maybe a wee bit more specific questions around work that's actually done across the departments and things like that. But just in general, how is it?
Oh gosh, it's been great. The support has been nearly overwhelming, right? So I was concerned about the fact this was an interim post. It hadn't been advertised. I'm just doing this, and then I'll apply for it and see what happens and all. So I was expecting a bit of pushback there, and it was good because Niall McCracken actually did a piece where he interviewed people who had some concerns about the role and the limitations of it, and what it could do. So I was aware that this wasn't going to be necessarily welcome, but actually it was great. The support's been great so far from the public. I've been inundated with one of the things I need to do in this role is represent the public, work out what public priorities are for mental health. We think we know what people want, but actually to find that out. So people have been just contacting me. When I say that in interviews and on the radio and things, people emailed me at my university address and have contacted me. So I'm having lots of meetings with people, and I'm going to set up a more formal and more efficient way of collecting people's views and finding out about their experiences. So that's been a really, really important part of what I've been doing. But then there's working with all the different government departments, and there's a mental health plan that's already been published in May. So I'm coming to this at a point where there is a plan of action, and I can shape and influence that. So they know what they want to do broadly. I can influence what that looks like, and can link them up with key people there and work on key committees. So it's been really good. And then there's things like the Department for Education have a framework there for schools that I've already been working on. Department for Justice are doing some work. I've already been linking in with them in my capacity as a professor. So there's things like that I'm going to be, more involved in, which is just lovely because that's what I want to be doing. So all good so far. But you know what? The budget's an issue. It's a major challenge. We don't have enough money. We've even less money now from COVID, and arguably the needs are greater because of the pandemic. There's, people have been tipped over certain thresholds, anti-mental illness, anti-worse mental illness, have difficulties accessing service and things. So I am, I'm not naive about the challenges here, but I think there's a really good opportunity to do something great here. And most people have been so supportive and have been asking how they can help with that.
When I looked at the roles as mental health champion, it said, a public advocate for mental health, a consensus builder, an advisor to senior stakeholders, and a challenger of decision and policy. So sounds like a kind of superhero type role. But I mean, it is quite a big role, and I think people are kind of keeping a keen eye. They do wish you well, and they really want to see a difference in the area of mental health and well-being. Just in terms of you talked about the kind of the education department, and different departments and how you're going to influence there. Is there any kind of specific examples that the people maybe watching or people in our particular areas might say, oh, right, I didn't realize that, or yeah, so, understand that better or something, so I was watching a wee clip of you a few years back around housing and how important housing is in terms of mental health and well-being. So, and I'm sure you're pushing the housing agenda across that as well in terms of mental health. So, in terms of examples like that, is there anything that kind of jumps out at you at the minute that you could maybe share with us?
Okay, yeah, there's several pieces. Well, thinking about the education piece, one of the things I did a couple of years ago was apply to the university for money to take on a PhD student to look at what's happening in schools. It's just something I was concerned about. Schools were saying that they were doing things and there was no money for them, and some schools were doing things that were good, and other schools that were doing things that I was just sort of wondering about. Where was the evidence that worked, and maybe things that weren't safe. So I got a PhD student from the university to contact the department. Then we contacted the Department for Education, and they said, yeah, we want to know too what's happening in schools, because we want to make a plan for schools, but we need to know where schools are at. So Nicole Bond is the researcher, and that survey of schools is now going to be published, and the schools have identified barriers. They've told us what they're doing, which is really, really helpful, because we want to build on that. So we know where there's actually great provision in terms of safeguarding children in schools. There's good provision for bullying and stuff like that. Most schools would have policies and things. In terms of mental health, there's not enough, and some schools are kind of making up their own stuff, whereas others are taking established programs. So this allows us to work out where the gaps are, and then I've had several meetings with the Department for Education to help shape their drafts of their framework, and now there's going to be guidance for schools and an implementation plan too, which includes a certain amount of funding, probably not enough funding, but to try and address those gaps so that schools can work to make things a bit better. So that's one example that of work that I'd already been doing that's now coming to fruition, which is a really, really good thing. The Department for Infrastructure are working on projects in Derry and in Belfast, around bridges and things like that. And there's a suicide prevention angle there that I can contribute to. And I've been working with the Crisis Intervention Service in the town here as well, to think about what they're delivering, what interventions they're delivering, and to get funding and things like that too. So those are areas that I've already contributed to, and will want to continue, but I can't keep that sort of close focus. I can't be in a steering group for any particular service right now, because that's like a conflict of interest. So it's about working with departments more than individual services to make sure that they're minded of mental health and well-being and suicide prevention too.
And it's good to know that, because as you know, sometimes people can work in silos and departments can work in silos, and I think that's important that mental health's ingrained across all departments, and I know you're an advocate for that, so that's really important. The suicide, I'm going to come on to in a wee second, but I listened to your TED talk as well in Belfast, which was really good, and I think I just would like you maybe to set a wee bit of the context around kind of the north and why I suppose mental health is in the state that it is. Maybe just for some people that'll be watching this, just they say, well, look, these are some of the reasons why it is why it is. And in particular, then maybe if you could talk a wee bit, I like your analogy around the biological response as well. So the body's response to that as well. So maybe if you could maybe talk a wee bit about that, Siobhán, just for people that are going to be watching and listening.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So my whole interest in this area started when I was employed as a researcher in Ulster University to run this study for Professor Brendan Bunting. He got money to run a mental health survey in Northern Ireland, and he wanted it to be part of this big worldwide survey. So I was kind of charged with going out to the US and finding out what methods and what questionnaires they were using and bringing it here and training. And between myself and Sam Murphy and Brendan, we did this big survey, and in 2005 to 2008. And what that study found was that really high proportions of the population in Northern Ireland had witnessed serious traumas 1 in 5 people had seen somebody dead or seriously injured, and that the troubles, the traumas that people had witnessed as a result of the troubles were related to mental illness. We had the highest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in any of the countries involved in that big group of surveys, right? So that was really, and all the other countries were asking us what was going on here, that was quite, so bad. And then there was a whole section on suicide in that study as well. And I published a lot of work along with the guys and started to lead stuff then on suicide and really getting into suicide prevention and looking at that part of the study. But what we found there was quite remarkable. And prior to that, we had felt that really the troubles, we were very resilient, and we are very resilient, but that hadn't really affected us too much. We were kind of hardened to it, and we could move on. But now, since that piece of work, and other studies obviously too, but since that one particularly for me was huge, because we were able to make those comparisons, and we used the psychiatric criteria for depression, mental illness, anxiety, and we found that 39% of the population at some stage in their lives had met the criteria for mental illness, and we'd used the best methods there, and it was just so worrying. So I just kind of it was my mission then to do something about this and to continue to study it. So I did a big study of suicide, looking at 1,600 deaths by suicide, and the factors that were influencing those deaths, along with Colette Corey, who was the lead researcher there, with the coroner looking at coronial files. And after that, people started asking me to be in committees and talking about this stuff. And it's all about how the body responds to stress and trauma. And that's mental health and suicidal behaviour. Suicide results from behaviour, which is a really important point that I make. There's mental illness, which is patterns of symptoms that affect how we behave, but suicide's a behaviour. And the biggest predictor of mental illness is actually childhood adversities, things that happen to us when we're children, because it's at those stages our stress response systems are being shaped. And stress and trauma influences how our bodies respond then across the lifespan to stress and trauma. So stress and trauma in childhood isn't just damaging, but it actually affects then our stress response for the rest of our lives, which is why I'm so interested in young people's mental health. And when we're under stress, our body reacts in a particular way, and it's a very natural response. We sometimes call it the fight or flight response, or fight, flight, or freeze response. And it's an evolutionary thing. It protected us. It allowed us to run away. It protected our bodies from the effects of fighting. So the blood would go to the heart, so away from the periphery. So injuries, were less likely to kill us. We're more able to run. Our muscles tense up. Our body deposits food, so we have diarrhea. But it prepares us to fight or run away, really. But unfortunately now we're left with this system, and most of the stressors that we encounter are psychological. So it could be an exam, a public talk, these sorts of stressors where running away is not so good. And for a lot of people, the stress is still around the stress of feeling under threat and being threatened in our home and our community or whatever. So that constant activation of the fight or flight response in childhood then predicts how we will react all through our lives. And there's just so much evidence now that when we have too much stress and we're not able to cope, and our bodies can't cope, we get depression, we get anxiety when we're nearly sitting in fight or flight all the time, and we're not able to focus, we're not able to work, we're not able to learn in the way that we can't have relationships. It just messes stuff up for us. And that approach would be called a trauma-informed approach. Yeah. And adversities at childhood, ACEs, sometimes people call it adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, adversities, or trauma-informed approach. And a lot of my work since that original study has been looking at the transgenerational effects of that. So when a parent has a trauma and they react in a particular way to that trauma, it affects how they relate to their children, which impacts on the children's stress response too, so it's passed on. So this is an area, and even looking at biological transmission of that too, taking DNA samples from students and things when we're doing our surveys now, that's something that we do as well.
And a lot of, I suppose, a lot of people, local people that we're working with across the community, know are, as you say, are impacted by trauma in some way, shape, or form. Now, it is a piece of work that we are looking at as a community. We're looking at trauma-informed practice across kind of the wider community, with the community organisations, the school settings, etc. And we're looking at, training for kind of organisations, key staff and personnel and that. So that is, it's good to hear that from you and the importance about that, because it is something that we're striving towards as well as a kind of a community to better ourselves in, because, like all these things, you think you understand and a lot of stuff, but there's a wee bit more to it, so we are working towards that as well ourselves, and it's something I think we'll get better at as we move forward. So
Yeah, come back in there. It's about shifting how we see behavior
yeah,
and how we see mental health. It's about thinking what has happened to that person, not what's wrong with them. What happened to them? Are they in fight or flight? Are they in freeze? Is that person that is that wee child that's trying to learn at school? Are they actually really highly anxious and you can't learn? Or are they in shutdown? Have they had so much trauma that they just walk out of the room? And it's not that they're badly behaved or bad people. It's because of the effect of stress and trauma on their body and on their brain. And we need to form relationships. Relationships are healing. We need to re-parent them in a way and make those connections to get them back into that physical state where they can be calm. And for a lot of young people, they're living now. They're at home in a state of fight or flight all the time because their homes aren't safe environments, and that's what we're doing. In a project that I'm involved in called Our Generation, it's a peace-funded project because this is related to peace building as well. You can't understand another person's perspective if you're just scared of that person or if you're constantly in fear. So mental health and peace are totally connected. But by using that trauma-informed approach, we can start to build those relationships and create healing and therapeutic environments that will then be conducive to change. So this is not about labeling somebody with depression, anxiety, that child's mentally ill, give them a tablet, give them this. Although medication's useful, I've taken medication myself for mental health problems, it's useful, but it's about thinking what has happened to them and how can we move them back into that physical state of being safe and social, I call it. There's different ways of describing this stuff. So that's what I would like. I would love to get that message out there as well about how mental illness, behavior, bad behavior, violence, social violence, drugs, alcohol, it's all because of stuff that's happened to us. We're doing the best that we can to cope with the effects of things on our bodies.
And I suppose that would lead me on the kind of the suicide issue and that topic. I mean, again, do people really know that much around it, bar the action itself? So, I mean, I can recall back there was a number of suicides in Derry and one in this area in particular, but people wanted to show that they cared, and people wanted to show that there's kind of solidarity with families and wanted to do something. But at times what they done was, and you'll see it across the world, I've seen it in different places, where people put messages on the bridges, people put shoes and coats at a place where the action happened, and there's different ways in which people do that. But is that the right way that people should go about doing that, Siobhán? Or what is your experience of that, and what are other kind of places around the world telling us that are good models to kind of help people, to support people, but in a way that's really effective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's such an important problem in Derry and Belfast and in deprived areas. The suicide rates are 3 times higher. Suicide is something people do. It's a behavior, so it's related to mental illness. But sometimes there's a suicide and the person doesn't have a mental illness, or the person who's suicidal will say, well, I don't see this as a mental health problem. This is about death. This is about the fact that my life is just not worth living. And who are you to say you're ill because you feel like this? So we need to, I think that message, suicide results from a behavior. So what influences how we behave. And the things that influence, whether we might be suicidal are things like relationship problems and debt and losing our job or losing somebody that we love. So we respond to what we would call a crisis. Now, how we see the world is influenced by mental health problems. So whether something is a crisis can be influenced by whether we have a mental illness. But you see, just treating the mental illness doesn't necessarily stop a person from being suicidal. And there's a lot of evidence now that when people are recovering from mental illness and we haven't fixed the problems that have made them think that life's not worth living, but we've improved their mood, they're feeling a bit happier, but they still have, and then something happens, they could still be really suicidal. So we need to make sure that people know where to go when they're in a crisis and know what to do when they're in a crisis. But if the message all around them is that everybody around here is killing themselves and we know how they're doing it, people like you, this is a person like you, and things like photographs and newspapers and, it's, how we memorialize people is really important, how we talk about people who've died by suicide. We can unintentionally make it something that people think about when they're in a crisis. And we know that when there's newspaper coverage and even coverage on social media about a suicide, we get clusters of copycat behaviour. For example, when Robin Williams died, there was an increase in suicides by the same method. Telling people about the method is so dangerous in a way. So we try and avoid that. Our recommendation is now that we don't talk about a method or a location or anything like that, because we know that people will inadvertently, when they're in a crisis, that's what they'll think about rather than asking for help. And when Robin Williams died and the method was highly publicised and even romanticised by the coroner, we see an increase in males of his age dying by the same method. In other cases, there was no increase, and this was when we emphasised the importance of asking for help and how suicidal thoughts are not a sign that you should act on those thoughts. They're a sign that something needs to change. You shouldn't take your life. A lot of us have these thoughts. A lot of us would think about the purpose and meaning of our lives, but those thoughts don't mean that we need to act on that. That's what we need to do. It means something needs to shift or change, and there's help out there, and there really is so much help out there for people in a crisis, and we can start to help you change. So by overemphasizing and reminding people about those who have died, sadly, that can lead to increases. So memorials, newspaper coverage of a death, that particularly if the coverage suggests that it was quick and painless, people kind of internalize that. And then when they're under pressure, when their fight or flight is activated, they react. And if the method is easily available, then that's what they'll do. So we need to shift gear. We need to emphasize the importance of asking for help and make sure people know how to ask for help, make sure that we know how to ask others if they're suicidal and how to get them help. A lot of good work being done in the Derry area about this. I've got stuff from Meet Mental this morning that's really impressive. So there's a lot of people trying to shift that conversation over to how do we get people to ask for help? What helps out there? What do you do? What do you do if somebody says they're suicidal? And we don't often ask that question because we're scared. But we do have Lifeline. We have the Samaritans too, a great resource. So we need to shift that. And putting signs on bridges and things like that generally doesn't have the effect that we want it to. Sometimes it can lead more people to that method. And there is some data. I've been involved in some studies there where we've shown that it can have the opposite effect. We just need to be so careful around messaging. I was involved in the publication and the preparation of the Samaritans media guidance on how the media talk about this, and there's a lot of information in there about how we should talk about suicide. We should never not talk about it, because it's important to be able to ask and to be able to say, but it's shifting it away then. This is, what are we going to do to change things? How are we going to help you? Some of the most effective treatments for suicidal behaviour, ask people, how are you suicidal? How strong are those feelings? When they come and go, when are they strongest? How do you get through them? What are your reasons for living? We're going to work and improve your life. So we need to remind ourselves what the reasons are to keep going. And we need those reminders in the newspapers and the TV and our social media. And we need to move away from reminders about what other people have done. So it's really difficult. And there's just so much really good stuff happening here that I'm really encouraged by the approaches that are taken now around that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about being positive too, isn't it? It's about trying to always see the kind of bigger picture and the things that are around you that are positive and that as well. So
gratitude's really, really helpful.
That's a word I was looking for.
Every day of the good things. No, and incidentally, positive thinking doesn't work. Trying to think of, trying to be positive in the face of something that's really quite negative is not helpful. But so it's about reminding ourselves about what we're grateful for and really working to change the things that we can change and accepting the things we can't change and learning how to make meaning. That's all therapy is. It's about coping with stress and about helping us try and make meaning from huge losses. And that's what grief's about. We all lose things in our lives. It's how we grieve that and assimilate that into our life story, and then try and construct a good life for ourselves, because there's always good stuff out there. There's always good things we can do, and sometimes it's hard to find those. But you can see there where the conversation has moved completely away from the numbers and how and where and how many to what can we do to help people, what's good about our city, what's good about ourselves, and what can we draw upon in terms of those strengths, to move forward to create good lives for ourselves and others.
So just in terms of, I'm just thinking, as a community kind of leader in terms of Healthy Living Centre, as a person and as a father and that, in terms of this kind of local community and that, are there any kind of hints or tips or things that you would suggest that one, that people could be doing, that two, organisations could be doing, that government can be doing, they try and ensure that this particular area, that the instances of kind of poor mental health or could kind of be reduced in terms of that, but whereas everyone's kind of outlook and positive mental health would be on the increase, so what should we be doing basically, or any hints or tips around that?
Okay, so my first, and this sounds counterintuitive, the most important thing is to start with yourself.
Right.
Okay, because if you're a community worker or a leader or a parent, everybody else is looking to you for the cues, for the signals. Is everything okay here? So we're pack animals at the end of the day. So you're taking your lead from me, I'm taking my lead from so we're all looking to those leaders, and they need to be competent, in control and calm. So it really does start with you. You need to look after your own well-being, and you need to be an example of good coping, not necessarily good mental health, because we've all gone through stuff, but just good coping and good self-care. And whenever you're in that place, whenever just by being with other people, you will be able to create therapeutic shifts for them, because your energy, it sounds very mystical, but your energy or your cues, your muscle tone, the fact that you're relaxed, you can make eye contact, you can listen, you can hear them better whenever you're relaxed, whenever you're in a safe and social place. If you're in fight or flight, if you're in the defense, if you're worried about something yourself, or if you're not in the right, then you're not going to be able to do your work. So I think it's got to start with you. And I'm not talking about indulgence or pleasure seeking. I'm talking here about managing your diet, your exercise, making sure you're getting enough sleep, and thinking about alcohol, caffeine, sugar, all of those things that influence our mood and how we are. And knowing yourself, if you're coming into a situation where you're angry, you need to take a step back, because you're not going to be in a good position to help anybody else. So I think all of it starts with each and every one of us. And then after that, we're in a position to reflect on what are our goals, what do we want to achieve for this community, for this person, what do we want to get for them, where do they want to go. And that's about listening. If you're working with one other person, it's about listening, helping them discover what's good in their life and clarify what needs to change, and that could be in a community, but it should always be strengths based. So think about what are the strengths that we can build upon, and how can we communicate our gratitude, and what have we got. And goodness knows we've got so much of that in COVID right now. We have seen communities come together. We've seen what people can do. So that is our building block. We don't start with rates of unemployment. All of these are issues, right? But we start with the strengths. What do we have? And then where do we need to get to? What do we want? Do we want people? We want people to be able to have those conversations about suicide, about mental health. We want people to have a trauma-informed approach, where we know that what happens in childhood is really, really important, but what happens to all of us is important, and how we communicate. And that whole Be Kind movement that happened just before COVID, that was a real example of that as well. So these things are crucial, but I think it starts with us. We've got to think about where we want to be and what are the steps there, and know that we're on a journey, and just be compassionate human beings. So is that helpful? Is that kind of, those will be my top tips for community workers. I think some of the communities that are sort of portrayed in the media as disadvantaged or whatever, there's actually a level of cohesion, of focus that you don't find in some of the affluent areas, where the problems are different. They're more hidden. There's pressure of a different type. So let's look at what we have.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to just probably move on. I'm just conscious of time too, and I know. Well, no, it's fine. It's been great. It's a great conversation. That'll bring us on probably nicely the impact of COVID-19, and mentioned there about the community sector's reaction to COVID-19. I think it's something that I'm extremely proud of, in terms of my own organisation and our kind of reaction to it. But not only that, the community sector right across the area, and right across the north as well. I mean, it's been nothing short of excellent. Really, really good. So, but in terms of, obviously, COVID is having, we talk about mental health, and now we're kind of, COVID had came upon us, and even in phone calls and conversations that we were having with service users and local people, and that you could see that the anxiety and the stress levels and that had all risen. Over the first few weeks, people were really uptight and worried, and I'm not sure what was kind of coming down the line. And then as the guidelines and the restrictions have kind of eased a wee bit, the shoulders have dropped slightly and that as well. But I think, once we navigate out of this, there's definitely going to be a piece of work that's going to have to be specific to this COVID. So, but what has been your kind of findings across the other areas, and have you been involved in work and specifically around COVID and that? And if so, could you just give us a wee bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was part of and still am part of a COVID response group that advises the government about coping with the mental health implications, or addressing, coping is not the right word, addressing the mental health consequences of COVID. And I'm also involved in an international consortium where we're looking at suicidal behaviour and COVID in different countries, looking at what the evidence is there, capturing the evidence early, and talking about suicide prevention in relation to COVID, which is slightly different. As I keep saying, that they're two slightly different things. So there's this international group, and then the Northern Ireland group was for mental health. There's been a lot of studies of COVID, and those studies are generally telling of the mental health impact of COVID. They're telling us that, as we would expect, whenever this happened, there was a huge surge in anxiety. And that was absolutely right and normal. I think anybody who wasn't stressed about this at the start was a wee bit disillusioned. A lot of people were in denial, and that maybe wasn't the best place. We all needed to be seeing this as a stressor, as a threat, because it is a threat. It's a threat to our communities, to vulnerable people, to everybody. And then we have lockdown, which with social physical distancing, right? So that's a pressure as well. So we have a pressure from a virus, and then we've also this lockdown, and how are we going to cope with that? And for 2 weeks, I was good for nothing, George. I couldn't do anything. I was having difficulty sleeping. I actually lost weight. I can't eat when I'm under stress.
Yeah.
So I was just, my big thing was, I'm not going to be able to work because I've got to look after a child at home. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to, well, it just was all catastrophizing, as you do. So I had that stress response, and it turns out that half the population had the same response, but we actually adjusted it really quickly. We kind of got into a new way of working. We found ways of coping with it, but there were certain groups that never really got back down from that highly stressful, highly sort of reactive anxiety at the start. And those were parents who were working from home with young children, particularly toddlers. That was a really, really difficult thing to do. People that had lost their jobs, healthcare workers who hadn't got the right PPE, who were seeing people dying in the most awful circumstances. And then there was the people affected by the virus. It's the unknown, the stigma, the effects of the virus on the neurological system, let alone the effects of on the body. Then the relatives of the bereaved. So there was all of those people, and they're all at high risk. And then you've got the lockdown brought children away from their friends, brought them out of school. Some of them are living in conditions that are less than ideal, where there's abuse and neglect. So school provided respite from that, and they were missing out on that. And there is a lot of concern about the impact of keeping children out of school, like real concern, because 6 months when you're 46 like me is just not, doesn't mean anything. But 6 months whenever you're going through those critical developmental phases, right, that's big. Like, you're missing out on all that communication. And some kids were really isolated because they didn't have brothers and sisters or friends that they could talk to. Kids that didn't have Wi-Fi or devices, that they couldn't access learning from school, and they couldn't talk to their friends. These are really big issues. So those are the groups we're concerned about, and that's what we put across in our government guidance as well. In terms of the suicide prevention angle, the suicide rates generally decreased, which is what you find whenever, and it happened in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. People have this sense of community spirit. They were in it together. Their support that keeps people going, and keeps people alive. And there was this uncertainty. We didn't know how it was going to end up. A lot of us thought this would be 6 months at worst, and now actually it's going on longer. So what we're seeing now is some upward trends there in certain groups, and a bit of concern about suicides, particularly in young people. Because the suicide rate is relatively low, you need to be looking at it for a few months before you can say anything definitive about the trends. So they were down, and they seem to be going up a bit. I know there are high suicide rates, but you're really talking about a few. Statistically it wouldn't be significant. So if you 5 a week normally, if it goes up to 6 or 7, that's huge for a community. But is it a trend? We don't really know. And the international evidence from previous pandemics and similar situations will tell us that it's the economic consequences. It's whether people lose their jobs. It's how the government deal with that recession that's coming now, that's actually going to have a massive impact on suicide rates. It's what happens whenever furloughing stops in November. Well, I'm really concerned about that. It's how we protect vulnerable people, and that's where we're going to see changes in suicide rates. But there's so much we can do. We were able to bail out the bankers. We can do this now. We can inject money. We can keep people in jobs. We can continue this if there's a will.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen, in respect to furlough, in terms of food poverty and kind of that, across this area, we were delivering up in the region of 800 parcels, across the area at one stage, for quite a number of weeks. And a lot of people who were asking for help were those that were on furlough as well. So that was people that maybe, were self-employed and as well, or as that too. And it's kind of, you know, it's a tricky situation, and now with this coming up in October as well, you know, in terms of where are people going to be at. So it's something we have to keep an eye on, and it's going to be a difficult situation, I think, for everyone, you know, to try and manage and try and support these people. But I'm hopeful that something can be done there, and I'm sure again we'll be doing our best to try and help those people as well. So but no, listen, Siobhán, it's been really, really interesting. I could talk all day to you and I could listen to you as well. I've had so much other bits and pieces there down about the mental health action plan, about innovation, because I was looking at the mental health action plan, and I see that innovation is in there. I'm a big believer in innovation too. So I would have liked to probably chat to you maybe about some of the innovative stuff and that. But as I say, look, with time, unfortunately, time's against us, and maybe we could pick the conversation up again at another date. And I'm sure, look, just to offer um, my thanks on behalf of myself and on behalf of the Fela for participating in this today, and just to extend a hand out to welcome me, and hopefully we can work together as not just my own organisation, but as a kind of area wide, and for the benefit of all local people in terms of mental health and well-being moving forward. So just to extend that invitation to you, and hopefully we can come together at some point in the near future.
Absolutely, George. I'd be delighted to talk to you and to the communities that you represent and serve, you know, to find out what we can do to make life better, and to help improve everybody's mental well-being, and to reduce the rates of suicide. These are huge passions of mine, and there's a lot of work going around innovation, and there's so much we can do that we're not doing, you know, that doesn't actually have to cost a lot. So let's do that, and let's keep in touch. And thanks everybody for listening to me for that length of time. That's been quite a long one.
It's pretty unfair, to be fair.
Yeah. You know, I'm on Twitter and I'm on the university email system for now, and I'll have my own email for the champions, and so you'll be able to contact me directly. Thanks a million.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.